All right. So I'll be talking about hidden comet-tails of marine snow in this talk, and related. So first of all, I'll have to explain a lot of words that I have written in this particular title. So my original project that was funded by HFSP was titled Birth, Life, and Death of Marine Snow, Real-Time Observations and Biophysics of a Sinking Ecosystem. And the host was Professor Manu Prakash at Stanford University. So when I saw his photograph, I saw this joy of doing science, his passion for solving global scale problems, and his enthusiasm to engage with people. And that's what drove me to work with him. And the first thing that I learned during my postdoc was that oceans are not, the notion that our oceans are just fluid mechanical entities moving around is not complete. Oceans are, in fact, if you look at it under a microscope, you see this diverse range of things that are microscopic and they're living. So each thing that you see here is a chain of diatom. There are ciliates, there are dinoflagellates, and there are bacterial component too, which I'm not even showing in this. So this is just a simple microscopy that like optical microscopy that I did. So oceans are not living, and the reason why this problem is important is because 50% of the oxygen that we are breathing right now is actually coming from them. So they're not decoupled from our lives in some sense. And it's a sinking into ecosystem because you can't switch off gravity. These diatoms are floating in the upper layer of the ocean, and as a result of gravity and buoyancy, they sink down. And this was hypothesized how deep oceans, deep sea organisms get their food from. And Alexander Akasis was the first one to hypothesize that these detritus that sink from the upper layer of the ocean as a result of planktonic activities is what feeds these deep ocean organisms. And that led to activity in the field where people wanted to now see what these things look like. And going and making observation deep in the ocean is not easy because of the high pressure that it incorporates. So William Beebe was a naturalist. With the help of his engineer friend, he created this bathysphere, which is essentially a steel like ball, and it was non-electrical. So he went down, connected by a cable, he went down and made significant observations of deep ocean ecosystem using a torch and a notebook. But it was not until Rachel Carson, who was really good at, during those times, non-male gender was not allowed to go in the oceans. However, Rachel Carson was an enthusiastic scientist, and she made this really beautiful analysis of the data that came from these ocean expeditions. She was the first one who very poetically described this detritus that William Beebe observed. When I think of floor of the deep sea, I see always the steady, unremitting downward drift of material from above, flake upon flake, layer upon layer, the most stupendous snowfall the Earth has ever seen. So it's non-seasonal, it's happening continuously as we're sitting here right now. It's that shower is happening continuously in the ocean, which she called marine snow. So it has nothing to do with ice. It is made of organic material, essentially plankton. The invisible light at normal resolution of a normal camera, this is what it looks like. It looks like snowflakes, but it has nothing to do with snow. It's important. Now, what am I contributing to this problem? So when I looked into the literature about the physics of marine snow, one thing that was common is people were trying to describe the sedimentation of marine snow using Stokes' law. So what does the Stokes' law tells you? It tells you that a sinking speed, so for small particles where inertia is negligible, the sinking speed of an object, a spherical object, is proportional to force and inversely proportional to the mobility of that particle or drag. So for spheres, this drag can be exactly calculated, which is what Sir G.G. Stokes did in 1850s. And density difference is something that you can, it's a measure of buoyancy. So the force is proportional to the density differences, V delta rho G, where G is the gravity and V is the volume. Now, applying this formula, which was an age-old formula, on marine snow was not pleasing to my eyes, at least, that the scatter was all over the place. For the same size, so y-axis is the size here, and y-axis is the velocity, sinking speed here, and the x-axis is the size. And for the same size, you can see like a diverse range of sinking speed. And with that, you can imagine the uncertainty. So this model, if you use to estimate how much carbon is being sequestered from the upper surface to the bottom, you will get answers ranging from all the way from 4 gigaton to 10 gigaton. So my motivation was to make this model more precise. And the first thing I wanted to do was to come up with observation-driven empirical relationships between structure of marine snow and its sinking speed. Okay, so how is carbon? So if you hang buckets, literally hang buckets and collect material at different depths in the ocean, you find that the total flux of carbon, this is per meter square per year, decreases as a function of depth. So there is some material being created by plankton, and as you go down, because of both bacteria and copepods, the material becomes lesser and lesser. So not all of what is created in the upper layer of the ocean reaches to the bottom. We have good understanding to measure, we have good ways to measure the organic material at the surface just from satellite measurements. We can see the chlorophyll content, and so that is well known. But so here, the processes that are central to this sedimentation of marine snow happens at both formation, sedimentation, and remineralization. By remineralization, I mean the decomposition by bacteria, happens at microscopic scale, while the sedimentation itself happens at kilometers of scale. So how do you bridge these two length scales? How do you observe something that is microscopically small while follow it over long periods of time? So it's a multi-scale problem, how to bridge these two length scales. So we take a observation-driven scientific approach. We go in the, so this was the first expedition I went to. So I was 3 months into the postdoc, and I was sent in the ocean for the first time, and I did not know that I get seasick until I was on the boat. So I went there. This is the Gulf of Maine, and we spent around 10 days doing sampling in the ocean. And this is, so aggregates in the ocean can form from various reasons. I was interested in organic rich particles, which are formed primarily from algal blooms. So the chlorophyll map of the ocean looked pretty active in that algal blooms were happening in that time. And great. Sometimes we don't find it. I have been on one cruise where we could not find an algal bloom. All right. So we want to do physics experiment. We are on a boat. So there is a canonical rock and roll dynamics. Until my PhD, I had always done experiments, whenever I did it, on a very stable grounds. And now I'm on the ship, trying to measure microscale dynamics while shaking on the boat, and also while taking Dramamines. All right. So the one thing that you can, there is a mechanical high-pass filter that is very useful, where what you're doing here is placing your setup on a mechanical 2-axis swing so that at least the rock and roll dynamics can be suppressed. All right. So this is what the setup looks like. So this is a gimbal, and there is a microscope sitting there. It's a very special kind of microscope that we built in our lab. So this microscope is essential. So it consists of annular ring, which we call gravity machine wheels. And you fill this with your sample. And your objective is looking at the annular region of the wheel. which could have particles that are sinking or rising or moving around. So now the wheel is mounted on a x and y-axis stage and a rotational stage, so it can move around and rotate. So if the object of interest is sinking down, the wheel can rotate. So there is a real-time feedback loop that is in play, also involves some machine learning algorithm for image analysis. You can always keep the object of interest in front of the objective by generating flow upwards using this particular kind of microscope. And the idea was, okay, let's see if this works on the ship. So first, you need something important to observe. So marine snow is, as I said, is an important for our lives. Okay, so we hang these net traps, sediment traps, with so it's like this big, tiny bottle, sort of, in the ocean at around 80 meters depth. And we let it stay there for overnight and let it collect the debris that is falling inside it. And at that point, it's tethered to the buoy, and we are just floating around. We bring it up. That's what it looks like when you bring it up, just to give you a scale of human size. And if you collect this material, you find this just a debris. And then you ask, OK, you're a physicist. How do you wrap your head around this kind of an object? How do you even start doing physics on it? OK, so one thing is that definitely physicists have done sedimentation experiment for ages. So we can do that. So in this particular movie, there is this wheel that I showed you. There is a marine snow aggregate. And that's an objective of a microscope. And as you can see, this wheel is rotating such that the aggregate is sort of levitating in the lab frame. So this is the mess that we see. It's a highly dynamic state. We saw marine snow are spheres. Just forget about it. They are not spherical particles. So Stokes' law will definitely not hold true, which is it's in the field currently, that's the holy grail, essentially. In climate models, that's what's used. So it's a we see flow-mediated fracture. We see merger due to differential settling, foraging by ciliates, and microbial activity. Again, I'm not even showing that, which I'm looking at currently, which I won't be talking about. But here we focus on steady-state dynamics. So you have this fragile aggregate sinking. As it sinks, it creates the flow, which molds its geometry, and the geometry further creates a flow. So there is a two-way fluid structure interaction that's happening in this problem. So first, let's look at the structure. So size is not sufficient. Let's look at the whole thing. So these are emergent structure. Gravity moves the flow. OK, so there's a rich variety of shapes that you already see, which manifests in the problem. And so we have the structure to sinking map. So we are not assuming anything about the Stokes' law here. We are looking at the thing. We are measuring the sinking speed by this tracking microscope. So we have a one-to-one map between structure and function, which is sedimentation velocity. So if you plot just the standard sinking, just the size of the aggregate, rough size. I mean, how do you define a size of a fractal geometry, for example? And the sinking velocity. Again, we don't find any difference. Stokes' law, again, is poor in the performance. Here we plot our data in the background of other data that was collected before. But this is the first kind of data, so the comparison is not accurate here in that they are taken by different, data is collected by different means. It also includes artificially created marine snow by rolling. So people put seawater and roll it in the drums and create aggregates and study them. So that's one part of the picture of marine snow, which is its static structure. The second is the fluid structure interaction, how it couples with the fluid flow as it sinks. So these are complex aggregate. If you try to do it in a brute force manner, you need to solve a partial differential equation, which is Stokes' equation, while satisfying no-slip boundary condition on this complex structures. And that is a notoriously difficult problem to do. But as observation-driven scientists, we can just look at what happens. Okay, so let's look. So what I do now, seed the solution with tiny polystyrene beads, so I can also look at the flow. And they are too tiny to affect the flow by themselves. All right, so this is what the flow looks like. If you look closely, in the trail, there are things that are sinking with the marine snow which you can't see. And if you do PIV, and plot the velocity field, the zero velocity field region looks like this. So the effective size that is sinking, so there's something invisible that's sinking with the snow, which you don't see by the naked eye. And that is ubiquitously present in the whole sample. So we find that presence of this mucus halo, why I call it mucus is the following reason. So we do, so if you look at the visible size and the invisible size, they are dramatically different. And the settling speed reduces as a function of this invisible size. So the date, if you try to estimate carbon flux just by looking at the visible size, that's wrong, because there's this invisible contact that people had not studied before. And we just happened to find it the first time we went in the CN study, their sinking dynamics, which people had not done before. And when we stain it by a particular type of staining, a transparent exopolymer stain, we established that this mucus is actually released by the plankton, which helps it aggregate, but then it's just there and affects the sinking dynamics too. And we build a minimal model for the sedimentation dynamics where we incorporate the viscoelastic behavior of this mucus along with the sedimentation, cook up some non-dimensional scales in the problem where there's sedimentation time scales, length scale of the particle, the density. So rho P is the density of the particulate matter, and rho mucus is the density of this invisible thing. And D is the ratio of elasticity to hydrodynamic stresses, and Vp by V is the volume of the particulate particle in the whole divided by the whole volume. And we write down linear response in the ambit of linear response theory, how the distortion of this comet-tail is coupled to the sedimentation dynamics. And if we assume it's a prolate spheroid, which most of these aggregates are, we can write down this express scaling function explicitly. And now, we initially started with saying, oh, the velocity depends on density difference and drag, which people had assumed to be just dependent on the size. That notion is incorrect because it depends not just on the size, but its composition, which is the density, because it's made up of frustioles and can be strontium sulfate even, and the diatom debris. And there is this elastic moduli that plays a crucial role in the size of the particle, because the presence of the mucus determines the effective buoyancy and the effective drag, both of which change the settling speed. And we can determine within this framework what the elasticity and what the tail length is as a function of elasticity and effective buoyancy, and also the sinking speed. So we should not look at the plane of size and sinking, but rather we are proposing that the material property of the marine snow directly impacts sedimentation dynamics. And this is the correct plane or a better plane to study marine snow which incorporates both structure and material properties of the system. So the important takeaway here was, so if you assume that you only had the visible part, if you don't know anything about the invisible part, which we discovered, and if you calculate how much time the marine snow spends in the upper 100 meters, because if it spends more time, it has bacteria and copepods have more time to eat them away and remineralize that carbon that would ideally go to the bottom of the ocean and release it back in the upper layer of the ocean and back in the atmosphere. If you incorporate the mucus, the time it spends doubles in that. Instead of around roughly 1 day, it spends now 2 days in the upper 100 meters. So effectively, the presence of this invisible halo impedes carbon sequestration, which is what we discovered. And if you incorporate all this internal degrees of freedom in the system, not just size, so size sinking looks like this. if you incorporate other internal degrees, it presents a better fit to the data. And now we're looking at much more richer aspects of this problem. It's not a sphere for sure. It's more than that. It's basically a sinking microecosystem where there are planktons, there are bacteria, and now we are looking at it in its entire richness. So this was the first drawing of marine snow. Now we have like a very detailed 3D tomography of marine snow where we can look at the gradients of density. And basically the density is not a fixed number, it's a heterogeneous quantity. So you might ask whether this was just an exceptional case where we went to the Gulf of Maine and found this Comet-Tail. So in 2 other expeditions, and we still are looking at sampling more and more of the ocean using this new framework. So in California currents, we found this tails. In northern Pacific Ocean, we found this mucus-tail. At least it is as ubiquitous as the presence of TEP itself. So marine snow, so ocean ecosystems are filled with transparent mucousy objects, and they affect the flux of carbon in the ocean. And the major conclusions are this, which I already highlighted, but I want to cover the special thanks to Manu, Ellie, Kay, Benjamin, and the science team in that expedition, and the Prakash lab. I want to also thank the gravity machine. So this is an instrument that we build, we improve. There are like feedback loops there too, and still we try to keep improving, take it to the expeditions. So I wanted to demonstrate that oceanography is a highly multidisciplinary science. I work with mathematicians, chemists, biologists, and a different variety of engineers, and thanks to HFSP for allowing that. And I want to leave you with this image that I took 2 weeks ago in the Pacific Ocean. I was on RV Kilo Moana, and this is a sunset. So ocean, Jack says, the sea once cast its spells, holds one in its wonder forever, which is true, which I have experienced for sure. Thank you.
Thank you very much for this great talk, but I'm sorry to hear that you have been seasick. We have time for 1 or maybe 2 very short questions.
I can be out.
Yeah, beautiful work. I'm wondering, in addition to gravity, do you have to take into account ocean currents or any other turbulence in your model?
Yes.
And how does it manifest?
So so the Ekman layer, the mixed layer is very small, around 10 meters, and the marine snow forms there. So most of the open ocean is actually a still ocean approximation is good enough. If you measure the shear rate as a function of depth is very minuscule as you go down and down. Only what the turbulent nature of the ocean only happens at the coastline or at the surface of the ocean. It's very misleading, the surface of the ocean. Also, an important thing that I realized from studying marine snow, only 10 to 20 meters of the ocean is sunlit. Essentially, it's dark. And thus there was this issue of where does the oceanic life gain its energy from if the primary production happens only in the surface. Yeah.
If I can just follow up on that, what about, there's lots of things like ocean gyres that are happening that are moving things around. You've got upwelling events and stuff like that. Mm-hmm. So,
we are further from upwelling. So upwelling events
those are closer to shore. Mm-hmm. But the gyres go out fairly long, yes. And those are certainly currents.
Yes.
And you said you did some of this in the California current. I guess it just seems strange to me that you can ignore it. That said, I really like the work. It's really
I do agree. There, like the sedimentation dynamics of marine snow is much rich, and it's a function of the behavior of sedimentation itself, as you mentioned, is a function of where you're observing it. Our primary motivation in this problem is to open a new window into the sedimentation dynamics itself, to look at the thing in detail, which people had not seen. And now we have laid this framework, basic framework, through which we can explore those questions. So yeah, those are very important questions, and we are only at the starting point where we can start building on more and more complexity, oceanic complexity in the problem. Thank you for the question. Yeah.
Yeah. So do you think that particle size and density is a conserved property? and doesn't change with depth
So
from your observations? Like, could you see them falling apart or breaking up?
we saw, so as I mentioned, fracture and merger events are very common. These are very fragile aggregates. And it's not a well-explored question how, so marine snow is a very vague, like it's a very vague term, very generic, blanket statement for all the particles you observe in the ocean. If things are made out of planktonic or plankton, you would assume that on an average, their density would be the same as the density of the cells themselves. But then there are an additional layer of complexity because plankton can regulate their buoyancy. So they can change their effective density. So there is this spread that I showed in the modified model, we attributed to actually the distribution of density. So there could be some statistical universality in the problem where there is a distributions are conserved rather than like the quantity itself. I don't know.
All right. Thank you very much.